Welcome, FCC, and those who are joining us from elsewhere. We are glad to have you online with us at FCC Worship Online this morning. Today we begin a new study series. I'd like to begin with reading from the first couple of verses of Psalm chapter 4. There, David writes to us, "Answer me when I call to you, O my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayers." Over the last several weeks, as we have dealt with the current coronavirus crisis, many of us have felt that kind of distress that David is speaking of there. It began first with the distress and concern about the virus itself and the concern of being infected and infecting those around us. Lately, it has fear has begun to be replaced by some people of a fear of economic collapse and a variety of other things, and even anger that the government is restricting us in certain ways. And we begin to wonder, God, do you have a word for us in the midst of this? Do you have something to say? And over the next several weeks, we will have several members of our teaching team share with us what God has been teaching them, what they have learned from God as they have been going through this. So God's word for us in a time like this is we deal with our fears, we deal with pandemic, we deal with lies and a variety of things. What is God saying to us, and how do we respond to a God like this? As we begin our worship this morning, would you join with us in prayer and then in song? God, we thank you for being a God who does hear, who is available, even when we are full of questions, even when your voice is faint. You have something to say. God, help us to hear your words. Help us to hear what you have to say. In Christ's name we pray. And the church said,
when the music fades, all is stripped away, and I simply come, longing just to bring something that's of worth that will bless your heart. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within, through the way things appear. You're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I made it. When it's all about you, it's all about you, Jesus. King of endless worth, no one could express how much you deserve. Though I'm weak and poor, all I have is yours. amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Who brings our chaos back into order? Who makes the orphan a son and daughter? The King of glory, the King of glory, who rules the nations with truth and justice, shines like the sun in all of its brilliance. The King of glory, the King above all kings. This is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy, worthy, worthy. Oh, this is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me.
Psalms 91, 1 through 6. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you in His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday.
Good morning, First Christian Church. I pray you are all well this morning and handling the stay-at-home situation okay. As for myself, as I've been staying at home, I've been studying through the Old Testament prophets in chronological order, and I come to the prophets that are prophesying shortly before the exile. Come to Isaiah chapter 7 in a verse that was originally directed towards King Ahaz of Judah. Now Judah was under pressure from Damascus and from Israel, so Ahaz was looking for help from the Assyrians. Isaiah warned Ahaz not to trust in a foreign king and offered him a sign of God's help in Isaiah 7:14, which says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive, have a son, and name him Emmanuel." Unfortunately for Judah, Ahaz did not heed Isaiah's words, and instead he plundered the temple to buy help from the Assyrians. Now God was already determined to solve Ahaz's problems, but Ahaz foolishly took matters into his own hands, and Judah paid dearly for it. About 800 years later, Matthew applies this verse to the birth of Jesus, and now I'm reading from Matthew chapter 1, verse 20 through 23. An angel of the Lord suddenly appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, "Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because what has been conceived in her is by the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." Now all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. "See, the virgin will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they will name him Emmanuel," which is translated, "God is with us." Of all the miracles in the Bible, this may be the most amazing. Somehow, the eternal, omnipotent, omnipresent God entered into time and space and took the form of a human fetus. Philippians 2, 7 through 8 says, "He emptied himself by assuming the form of a slave, taking on the likeness of men. And when he had come as a man in his external form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even to death on a cross." And we know that he rose on the third day, and by raising from the dead, he proved his power over death, he defeated death, he proved his divinity, and he gave us hope for eternity. Now, taking this back to the original lesson that God had for King Ahaz, we need to trust in God for our deliverance. Our faith is in Jesus. It's not in doctors. It's not in governors. It's not in presidents. It's not in ourselves. It's not in anything anybody around us can do. Our faith is in Jesus. We serve a risen Savior. He is in the world today. And because he lives, we can get through this. Because he lives, we can face tomorrow. If you know the words to this, please sing along with me. God sent his Son, they called him Jesus. He came to love, heal and forgive. He lived and died to buy my pardon. An empty grave is there to prove my Savior lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. And then one day I'll cross that river, I'll fight life's final war with pain. And then as death gives way to victory, I'll see the lights of glory and I'll know he lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. Please pray with me. Almighty God, we praise you and honor you, Heavenly Father. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you for the prophecies for centuries before that foretold his coming and the way you fulfilled your word in his birth and his life and his death. We thank you for him coming and showing us about you, for living as an example for us, for dying for our sins, and for his resurrection to give us hope of eternity. Father, we thank you that he lives and that your Holy Spirit is here among us today, even as we're in separate places. Father, I pray that as we honor you, as we worship you, that you would forgive us the things that we've done this week where we've gone against your will. Father, we thank you for the blood of Jesus that covers us and cleanses us from sin. And Father, now as we celebrate together in different places, but all together in your spirit, we honor and praise your Son, Jesus, and thank you for this time of communion we have to remember and to renew our spirits with you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. The body of Jesus that was broken for our sins. The blood of Jesus shed for our sins.
Good morning, FCC. Things have changed a lot the last couple months or month or whatever. So let's get back to the basics. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life." Sacrifice, giving. I'm sure people are calling on the church right now. We don't know everything that people need or are going through, and we may never know. But some of them are willing to contact the church and see if they can get get the assistance that they need. During this time, even though we're not meeting at the building, we can't discontinue our giving. We know what our church does with the money. They don't hide anything. They show us the books. So we can be confident that as we send our checks or Quick Pay or Zelle, whatever, we can be confident that FCC will do the right thing with it. And I'm sure our benevolence fund will be helpful to some people. So during this time of giving, whether it's giving up things like vacations and plans, and parties, unfortunately, some people haven't been able to properly bury their loved ones, or give them the type of funeral they feel like they deserve, just because of this whole social distancing. So let's continue to give to the church. Let's give to each other, whether that's checking in, seeing if you could pick up some grocery items for someone who's not able to get to the store or shouldn't be going to the store, or let's do our part. Let's keep the social distancing up. Let's protect each other. These things can be uncomfortable, but let's do it. Back to the basics. John 3:16. Give. Let's give to one another. Miss you guys, FCC. God bless.
Good morning, First Christian Church.
Crisis that we're in right now, and just kind of share with you what God's placing on my heart to say, and to hopefully encourage each of you as we all just try to get through this. I think it's pretty common for us as believers to start to wonder. Good morning, FCC family. Hope everyone's doing well. Once again, I miss you guys, and we're all just trying to get through this whole thing, and it's kind of frustrating at times, but we're just all adjusting the best we can. And so that means a few more weeks at least of online worship and pre-recorded messages such as the one you're hearing now. I want to share some thoughts with you this morning, just some personal reflections regarding what God is telling me or saying to me through this whole crisis that we're in right now, and just kind of share with you what God is placing on my heart to say, and to hopefully encourage each of you as we all just try to get through this. I think it's pretty common for us as believers to start to wonder what God is doing, and perhaps even speculate about what God is doing and why he's allowing this pandemic to happen, why he's allowing people to die the way they've been dying the last several weeks, and just try to get inside the mind of God and just speculate about why all this is happening. Part of the believer is wanting to have that understanding of what God's doing, and that will cause us sometimes to say, you know what, I think I know what God is doing. I think I know why this is happening. People will say, oh, well, God is doing this to punish us for this sin, or to teach us that we should have done this instead of that. Just things that we will say and do to just suggest that we know why God is doing what he's doing, as if everything that happens in our world has some sort of intentionality behind it, and that God is intentionally causing this to happen because of his plan. It's kind of similar to what happens in the book of Job, right? Because here's Job, he's basically blameless and living a perfect life, hadn't done anything wrong, was righteous, feared God, and yet he starts losing everything. And so his friends start speculating about why all of these bad things are happening to him, as if they know exactly why all this is happening. And they can say, well, oh, God is doing this because of some sin that you've committed. Okay, so I've got to go to the bathroom now. Okay, I'm back. I don't think we have to think of the coronavirus that way. I don't think we have to think of it as the result of God judging or punishing the world. You see, the story of Job ultimately shows us that it's pointless to speculate about what God is doing, because God works in ways that we can't always understand or comprehend, and we can't control what God does. We can't control how God operates. So instead, what we should do is focus on our response to what's happening, not trying to figure out the why, but to instead focus on what can I do, or what should I do in response to what's happening. And not only that, what can I learn? How can I grow in light of the situation that we're in now? So that's kind of where I am with all this. And I guess there are kind of three main areas that I want to focus on as things that God is showing me, or things that God is saying to me personally in light of this whole situation that we're in. I'd say that one of the main things that God is showing me through this whole situation is that our lives are interconnected. Think about it. This virus, the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, originated in China, which is on the other side of the world from us. And yet now, it's infecting people and killing people all over the world. And now it's hitting close to home because we turn on the news, and every time we look at the news, it's all about how the coronavirus is spreading throughout our country. How much thought do we typically give to what's happening in other parts of the world? How much time do we typically spend being concerned about other countries besides our own? There's a story in the book of Joshua in which a man named Achan sins as the Israelites are conquering the promised land. Achan takes some things that were supposed to be devoted to God as sacrifices and keeps them for himself. He makes a selfish decision. And the result of his decision is that the Israelites are defeated in the next battle that they fight. So what happens is people who have nothing to do with Achan's choice or Achan's decision are impacted by it, and some of them even lose their lives as a result of it. You see, right now, only a percentage of the world's population has the coronavirus. And yet all of our lives are being impacted by it. It's not like any of us in particular did anything wrong. Nobody did anything wrong. We're all just living our lives. right? And yet this virus originates and spreads among us simply because of how interconnected our lives are. It's another example of how what happens to me can impact not just you, but others as well. It's a reminder that my life isn't just about me, that what I do, both the good and the bad, affects other people. I'm sure we're all aware that it's about to become mandatory that we all wear a mask when we're out in public places. And some of us, frankly, don't really like that idea very much. But we have to remember that it's not just about me. It's about helping our communities stay safe. You see, the reality is, even though I personally may not have health challenges, I have neighbors who actually do. And so my actions, my decision of whether or not to wear a mask can actually influence them, can have an impact on their health. God created us to live in community. And this means thinking of others, not just ourselves. You know, a lot of times something like this happens and we ask, where is God? Why is God allowing this to happen? Where is God right now? The way I like to respond to that is that God is within you and me. Whenever we extend assistance to other people, help to other people, compassion toward people, even just spending time in conversation with people when they just need to talk, that's where God is. God is using you and me to minister to other people, to share his love with other people, to bring healing to those who are hurting. The second thing that God is showing me through this crisis is that life should not be taken for granted. You see, when you watch the news and you see that so many people are dying, so many people are suffering, including people who seem to be in relatively good health, it makes you aware just how short life really is. We're all here today, but we may not be here tomorrow. That's just the reality. We can't take our lives for granted. We can't avoid death, obviously, but we can practice healthy living. There are probably a lot of us that are assuming that we're not susceptible to infection. We're not susceptible to illness simply because we feel fine. We feel like everything's okay, so we assume that we're not going to get sick, we're not going to get the virus, we're fine. But that's not necessarily the case. So we need to practice healthy living, eat right, take care of ourselves, exercise, get up and walk around. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. That felt good. Not taking life for granted also means that we should spend our time doing what's most important. As I'm sure you know, music is something that's pretty important to me. So I've actually been spending a lot of time writing music, writing songs, recording over the last few weeks because it's important to me and it's something that God has gifted me to be able to do. And I don't want to take for granted that I'm going to have the rest of my life, however long that is, to continue to write and record. And so I'm making the most of the time that I have now to do that. And the thing that you need to ask yourself is, what is it that God has called you to do? What are the things that you need to prioritize, that you need to spend your time doing? You see, for me, what would be tragic is not that I would die from the coronavirus, or from anything for that matter. What would be tragic is that I would die without having fulfilled the purpose for which God put me here in the first place. So let's not take life for granted. Let's figure out what it is we're supposed to be doing. About the things that we need to prioritize and focus on doing those things right now, today. I think the third main that God has reminded me of over the past several weeks is that I have so much to be grateful for. I realize that I have family, I have friends, I have health, I have a job, I have a house to live in, I have insurance, and so many other things. You may recall that a few weeks ago, Stacy and I mentioned that we have neighbors who live across the street from us, whose daughter, Noelle, who had been living with her boyfriend, recently lost her boyfriend to the coronavirus. And we ask you guys to pray for them and keep them lifted up in prayer. On Easter Sunday, Noelle came home to visit her mom and dad, who are our neighbors across the street, and she couldn't go inside the house because she had been with her boyfriend who had the virus. And so they had to sit outside in front of the house and keep, a certain distance away from each other, couldn't hug each other, couldn't really get close to each other, and they had to basically just sit outside at a distance having a conversation with each other. And so I saw that and I just couldn't imagine what that must have felt like to be a parent and not be able to hug my daughter when she came home to visit me. Because as you know, I have two daughters and we hug each other all the time. Not that they always want to be hugged. Sometimes I have to just grab them and just say, rah. Yes, Geneva, I'm talking about you. But the point is that it made me grateful that I have children, that I can hug them and be close to them, spend time with them. Because as of right now, I have my health and so many other things to be thankful for. And so even when things aren't going the way I want them to, which is how a lot of us feel right now, we can still count our blessings. We can still stop and think of things that we have to be thankful for. We can choose to focus on the positives rather than the negatives of everything that's happening right now. And it's not always an easy thing to do, but I think that's what God is calling us to do. To not take life for granted, to be thankful, to be grateful, and to just trust Him and know that He's going to take care of us and He's going to be there for us. Not only through this pandemic that we're in right now, but through the rest of our lives. So that's what God's been saying to me lately.
Greetings. Again, one of the things that we're going to be doing as we have this time of teaching from our members together is after they've done their teaching, what God's been teaching them, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to interview them to find out exactly how God's been speaking to them, what circumstances have been that God has clarified His word to them, what kind of things they're dealing with, and trying to crack open some of these things. And so we'll be cutting away to a Zoom conference between Jincy and I. I'll be interviewing him and sharing with him, talking with him, asking for him to share with us more about what his thoughts were and how he arrived at those things. So if you give us just a moment while we connect that together, we will do that. Ready? Jincy, thanks for teaching this morning. Thank you for the points that you shared with us, the insights that we gained, and I'm hoping that we all listened to you and listened well to the things that you had to share. You began by talking about us being in the midst of this, and in the midst of this crisis and thing, and trying to come to terms with a God that we feel is loving and gracious and kind and wants what's best for us. Um, and the idea that God's in control, that God is making some of these things happen, that essentially God's the reason for this pandemic and he's making people die and things like that. How have you wrestled with that? How did you come to terms with that issue?
That's a great question, Steve. And I think we've all, as Christians, wrestled with those sort of things throughout our Christian lives. You know, if God is God and God is good and God wants what's good for us, then why are these bad things happening? We just have to remember that, first of all, life is bigger than any one of us individually. Life is bigger than the things that are happening to me, or even the way that I perceive that things are happening to me, because we tend to focus on the negatives and the bad, whereas there there may always be, not necessarily, but there may be some greater good that is being served by whatever it is that's happening. Whereas I'm focusing on how it's negatively impacting me, or the things that are hindering me or hurting me as a result of what's happening. If I were able to zoom out and maybe see things from more of God's perspective, I might see something greater, something that's actually a positive, even if I don't perceive it that way. There might be something greater at work, greater happening, that's just beyond my limited perspective. We have to just keep that in mind. That as human beings, as men and women, our perspective is just limited, and so we can't always see things the way God sees them and see them from God's perspective. And so, yes, God loves me. Yes, God wants what's best for me, but that doesn't always mean that things are going to happen the way I want them to, or that I'm going to like or understand why things are happening the way they are. And so it just ultimately comes back to trusting that God knows what he's doing and that God is going to work things out in the way that's best, not just for me personally, but according to his divine plan for all of humanity.
Okay. This week, a pastor friend was explaining that he had pre-recorded his message and said, "This week I did a first. I went to the bathroom during my sermon." Um, I noticed you in your recording dismissed yourself for a period of a bathroom break. Would you explain to us why you included that in your message?
I just didn't feel like stopping the tape, I guess. I just got up to go, and I don't know. I just feel like, you know, I decided I wasn't going to focus on making everything absolutely perfect, because I tend to be a perfectionist, and what that does is that it makes me spend way too much time trying to fine tune things and cut and edit and paste and do this and that. And so I just decided from the beginning, when I was starting to record my sermon, I just said, you know what, it's not going to be perfect, and I'm not going to try to make it that. So when it just turned out I needed to go to the bathroom, I said, hey, I'm just going to get up and go to the bathroom. So that's the way it worked out.
And actually, at the time that happened, it comes to support the point that you were making, that God doesn't cause all things to happen at certain times and so forth. I mean, did God cause you to have to go to the bathroom at that moment? That doesn't that's we don't necessarily attribute that to God.
It's just the way it worked out. We don't, like I said, we don't always understand why God does things the way he does, or why things work out. And sometimes things just happen a certain way, and it just turned out I needed to go to the bathroom.
Okay. What are some of the particular ways that God has been speaking to you over the last several weeks?
Well, as you know, we're restricted from being out together in public, but we can get out of our house and just go for walks through our neighborhood. And so I've been taking advantage of that and just going for a lot of walks lately. And in fact, I went for a walk this morning before worship began. And for me, those are times when I can just be alone with God and just listen to what he's saying, and just hear his voice a little more clearly than when I'm around other people. And so those have really been a blessing for me personally. And it just helps me to just put things in a broader perspective, like I was saying earlier, and to just hear God speaking to me. And so that's one way. Another way is just through conversations I've had with individual people. I believe I shared in hospitality last week. There was this woman that I met on one of my walks. I never talked to her before, and um, she was just sitting out on her front porch, older lady. You know, a lady that I wouldn't necessarily have thought would have been interested in having a conversation with me, but she said hi. I said hi back to her, and we just kind of exchanged greetings, and we just got into a conversation and just started talking. And so, just the way God used that moment to just help me connect with someone I hadn't connected with before, and that's happened a few other times as well, just in conversation with people as I'm out walking. God's really spoken to me through those times just to hear how other people are responding to what's happening right now. And so that's been a major way that God's been speaking to me as well.
Okay. Now, all of us have had to do some adjustments, life adjustments, over the last several weeks. One of those, my wife hasn't allowed me to leave the house. Um, my wife has me thoroughly quarantined. Um, and with the shelter in place, the government mandates for that. What are some adjustments that you have made, and how have you personally, um, how have you been personally impacted by everything that's happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm perfectly content just being to myself and kind of doing my own thing, but I do like to get out and just be around other people. I like going out to eat. I like going to stores and just being out and seeing what people are doing, going out to the park and just hanging out there. So not being able to do those things has been a challenge for me, um, particularly the eating out part, probably because I really like eating out at restaurants. But just I have been doing our grocery shopping for us. We've been going to the store I've been going to the store every few weeks, and just really taking on that responsibility. Whereas it might be that Stacy and I would typically take turns going to the store to get groceries. So, now I just, out of concern for her health and the girls and everything, I'm just the one that's going to go out and do the shopping for us now, and then having to get enough for a couple of weeks or longer as opposed to just getting what we need for the week. That's been just interesting, and just being in the stores, seeing people, and just you can even kind of see the fear and anxiety on people's faces when you're out. So it's been an adjustment for all of us, and so I've handled it okay, I would say, but just not being able to be out and come and go freely like I was before, that's been quite an adjustment for me.
Hmm. Yeah, I've over the last several weeks, I've been to the chiropractors twice. I've been to the office twice, and that's a walk down the street to Pam's house, to Pam Marcus's house, to deliver communion stuff to her, and that's the extent of my engagement outside of my house. So yeah, it has definitely been something that has altered our way of living. In your talk, you shared that one of the things that you've learned um, is that you're reminded that God calls us to live in community. Um, Yet some of us have a tendency to lean on our self-sufficiency because we don't want to be a burden to anybody else. Um, what would you say to those of us who are struggling with that sense of independence um, as we're going through this hard time and trying not to ask for assistance?
The first thing I would say is I totally understand that, because I tend and have tended for my whole life to be that same way. Just I do my own thing, and I don't really ask for help for the most part. I figure out how to do things on my own. If there's a problem, I'll figure out how to solve it. That's my natural tendency. And so, but I've had to live through times where I've had to depend on other people because I just didn't have the resources that I needed. I didn't have, you know, the knowledge that I needed to get through something. And so there are simply times in our lives when we need other people and we can't just do it all on our own. And that's not something to be ashamed of. That's not something to feel badly about because that's the way God designed it. He designed us to live side by side with other people, to live in community with other people. We look in the book of Acts, we find those two passages in Acts 2 and Acts 4 where the church came together and it said they had all things in common and they shared their resources and they broke bread together and made sure that everyone had what they needed. And so that's part of the way we're designed. And so if you're sitting at home right now and you just know that you need assistance, whether it's financial assistance or you need someone to help get groceries for you because you can't get out or you just need somebody to talk to, just own that, just admit that, and don't be afraid to reach out to someone. And just it's not something to be ashamed of. We have to, you know, realize that we're not always capable of being self-sufficient. You know, we've kind of grown up in a culture here in America where we're kind of, you know, do-it-yourselfers and we're trained to be independent and self-sufficient. Well, we have to get out of that mindset, especially in times like this, and be willing and ready to admit that I just need help, and that there are people, realize that there are people that are willing and waiting to assist you with whatever it is that you need, because that's what we're here for, and we ought to be there for one another because that's what God intended for them.
Hmm. That's been a tough lesson for me over the last 5 months. Not just with the coronavirus stuff, but with my physical complications, and then with the coronavirus because of being immune compromised. That's affected my ability to be out. So I want to thank Elizabeth, who has become our designated grocery shopper. But even before that, some of the things the congregation has done to serve me as I've been going through this. But it's been tough because I tend to be independent and self-sufficient, and to rely on others has been a tough thing. So again, I understand what you're talking about. One word of caution that I'd like to give those who are struggling right now. I'm not sure where everybody is economically because of this. I don't know who has lost employment, who has lost a number of hours or something like that, and is really putting a squeeze on you financially. Let me encourage you not to wait to ask for assistance from the church until you are at the breaking point. Um, don't wait until it's too late. The church has a benevolence fund that we collect out of our faith promise to be able to help you. So if there's economic and financial concerns that you have, please go ahead and ask us. There are also people who are willing to run some errands and things like that. There's people who've said, Steve, if anybody asks, I'll go do grocery shopping for them, things like that. So is there a parting word that you'd have for us, Jincy? Just any last thing that?
Just a word of encouragement. You know, the other side of us, each of us being willing to admit that we need help, the other side of that is each of us being ready and available to assist somebody that needs it. And I just want to encourage you to be ready for that, and that God has a blessing in that for each of us when we assist other people. You know, I've talked to, you know, a few times now about our neighbors who live close to us, and just so now whenever I'm going out to the grocery store, I'll run and knock on their door across the street or give them a call and say, hey, is there something I can pick up for you since I'm going to the store? Because I know that they're limited in their ability to get out, and so and they'll say, hey, I need you to get this, I need you to get this, and I'll just get it for them and not even really ask for anything in return. And there's just a feeling of of gratitude that I get from being able to do that for somebody. And
Huh?
so I just want to encourage each of our members to to just reach out, not just to your neighbors, but to others around you, or family or friends or whoever. You know, don't wait for them necessarily to ask you. You know, just go ahead and say, "Hey, I'm going to the store. Can I do this for you? Can I get this for you?" And I just really think God blesses us, and just it fills us up spiritually whenever we are ready and assist other people in those sort of ways. And so I just want to encourage each of you to do that as we go throughout this whole thing the next few weeks.
Some tremendous avenues for the ability to minister and for God to use us as His people to share His love with others. Thanks
Amen.
for sharing that.
Thank you. God bless you.
Coming up, you've got something that you have sent an email out about, asking us to get some information to you. You want to just follow up on that?
Sure. So you may have seen the Facebook post or the email. Every year at FCC, we recognize our graduates, and so we're going to do that again this year. Obviously, the recognition is going to take a little bit of a different shape this year because of the situation we're in. But right now, I'm just wanting to know who all of the graduates are, and that's if you're graduating from kindergarten, if you're graduating from 8th grade, graduating from high school, graduating from college, if you're graduating from grad school or trade school. Just trying to get a list of all the names of all of our graduates. And what's going to happen is, once I know who the graduates are, I'm going to communicate with them and let them know what the plan is. And probably the plan is going to take some sort of form of each of our graduates doing a short video telling who they are and where they're graduating from, and something about what the experience has been like for them, and just what their plans are going forward. Some sort of video that kind of captures that person's story, their graduation story, if you want to think of it that way. So again, I just need everyone's assistance in finding out who our graduates are, so that I can begin to communicate with you about what the plans are. And the date that we're going to be recognizing them is June 14th. But what we'll need to do in advance of that is get each of you to submit videos and put that together so that you can have something to contribute for that Sunday when we are recognizing our graduates. So that's what that's all about.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Also coming up today, our hospitality. We have finally worked out the kinks in trying to incorporate our connection groups. So today we will have some time of hospitality, and then an opportunity for you to go in your smaller groups with your connection people and reconnect with them. And so some of you have been requesting that and asking when that was going to happen. So that is on slate for today. Jincy, you have something set up for students as well. So we will have a group for them. So if at home you've got a couple of phones that you can dial in, or a computer and a phone, go ahead and hand one of those off to the kids so that they can dial in and be part of Jincy's group as well. We'd love to have them as part of that. This time becomes crucial for us to remain connected with one another, not just to have a time of music and sermons and stuff, but for us to get together, to share together, to pray together with one another, and to see what God is doing in each other's lives, and to mutually encourage and strengthen one another. That's the reason for our group life, our connection groups together with one another. Let me remind you, we have the Tuesday night Bible study and the Wednesday morning Bible study, which we conduct by Zoom. We invite you to be a part of either one of those. If you would like to be a part of one of those and you aren't currently, and you don't have the information, just email me at steve@firstchristianchicago.org, and I will send you the link so that you can become part of that group as well. We'd love to have you as one of our members for one of those groups. We'd love to have you. Okay, let's pray together, and let's ask God's blessing upon us this week as we be the church, not just in this gathering time together, but as we live this week out together. God, we pray, hearing your word, that this is not You are not to blame. Things are here, things are working, things are available. You are who you are, but you have a message for us in the midst of this. You have something that you can teach us. So God, make us hearers and doers as we live this week. In this gathering time together, as we live this week, God, we pray that you would allow us to hear, to obey. And God, we pray that we pray that in the midst of this, God, you will do your work. In Jesus' name, amen.